today's press review, we're joined by our own Solange Mogin. Solange, thank you for joining us. Today's top story, the Yellow Vest movement. And of course, this is an ongoing movement here in France, and it's continuing to make headlines across the country.
Indeed it is. We want answers is basically the message that most French dailies are talking about today. Let's take a look at the right-leaning paper, Le Figaro. They focus on how the president needs to find the right words, as well as humility and realism to successfully end the 4-week-old movement. Meanwhile, the left-leaning paper, Libération, has a headline with a big question mark at the end of it. It asks, Manu or Emmanuel, can you hear us? Now, the paper doubts whether the president will really metamorphosize and change his ways. Libé says that real change is improbable in tonight's address, and that the big question is whether Emmanuel Macron can come down from his pedestal and compromise. For Libération, the only way forward is through taxing the rich, and they say that Macron will not be willing to do that.
Of course, we'll get an indication of that in this evening's address at 8 p.m. Solange. Now, how is this French protest movement being covered across the globe by international papers?
Well, a lot of international papers are playing with this idea of revolution, that revolution is in the air, that this is the 21st century revolution in France. Let's take one example from El Mundo. The Spanish daily, they have a cartoon that is a spoof of Delacroix's painting Liberty Leading the People. It is a take on the idea that revolutionaries have made it to the Louvre and are carrying bayonets again. Well, Le Temps, the Swiss paper, it deflates all of that, this talk of revolution, in its editorial. It says that the concept of revolution is quite present in French culture, but that when it comes to enacting real revolution, the French people aren't really ready for it.
And of course, fingers are being pointed at the leadership here in France, and there was a piece today in The Guardian doing the same.
Yeah, The Guardian has an opinion piece that says, that starts with the line, the French people are unhappy with their lot, what's new? Well, The Guardian says that what's new is that the right is not the difference between the right and left political differences, it's that Macron tried to destroy those divisions, or France's political makeup with his politics. And in doing so, he exacerbated, according to The Guardian, a sense of economic inequality and a sense of cultural isolation, because people feel they don't have a political voice anymore. The paper says that there are no easy answers here, but that France needs more listening from its leaders and less leading, that Macron, quote, needs to come down a peg or two or three.
Now, Solange, beyond this disgruntlement even that we've seen over Macron's presidencies and policies, some papers are wondering to what extent the Yellow Vest movement is actually a rejection of climate change policies.
Well, the two issues, Macron, the president, and climate, are very intertwined. And that's because this was started by a fuel tax. Now, let's take a look at this cartoon by Ramirez. It illustrates the mixture pretty well. It says, Mr. President, you're right, the climate has changed, politically and environmentally. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Yellow Vesters are against the environment. This past weekend, during the climate march, Green Vesters and Yellow Vesters did join together in some smaller cities in France. And The Atlantic, the American site, argues that the Yellow Vesters aren't against greener policies. It's just that such moves are a hard sell, and that Macron's government didn't present the narrative well for what needs to be done to combat climate change.
Now, today, a manifesto is being published by a number of economists, and it's focusing on how to go about including carbon taxes in policies that also reduces inequality. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's entitled "Our Manifesto to Save Europe from Itself." That's the title of the action.
It's optimistic there.
Yes, it is. It's the title of an action plan proposed by Thomas Piketty and 49 other economists. They published this in a number of European dailies, and they're pegging the plan a new blueprint for a fairer Europe, one that would levy higher taxes on multinationals, millionaires, and on carbon emissions. It would create a budget of 4% of Europe's GDP to help smooth out inequalities, not between European nations, but within them. We'll have to see if such ideas on paper actually go anywhere when it comes to policy change.
Moving on to this issue of climate change and the current COP24 meeting that's taking place in Poland, that's something that's also being addressed by the papers today, right?
It is. Yeah. And the New Yorker says that there is going to be coal for Christmas. It's quite sad. They say multiple nations are hitting the snooze button at the conference that's meant to create a rule book following the Paris climate deal. Even worse, the magazine magazine also explains how Donald Trump's administration isn't just trying to undermine climate action, but is promoting the use of fossil fuels as well. For the New Yorker, the climate conference might just serve the sad purpose of showing the world that such negotiations are not useful. They're a fiction.
Moving on from coal for Christmas to something slightly lighter, you have been looking at something that further perpetuates this myth that French women have it all.
Yeah, after the bestseller French Women Don't Get Fat, The Guardian is playing today with this cliche. They have a pastiche book review of why French women feel young at 50. It's a tongue-in-cheek article that mixes French and English, and the reviewer encourages people of all ages to, quote, get beaucoup d'action au lit. At least it says that's what French women do in bed.
Very good. Thank you very much for that, Solange Mojan. Of course, to get more on what Solange has been talking to us about, you can go to our website. That's www.france24.com.